Okay, hi everybody. I'm Cliff Neve, Vice President of Cyber for Maritime Security. I'm here today to talk about a challenge that many maritime organizations are facing. How do you move beyond compliance and become secure? The Coast Guard cyber rule is driving a lot of activity right now across the maritime sector, and that's a good thing. But one of the biggest misconceptions we continue to see is the belief that if you become compliant, you're automatically protected. In reality, compliance establishes a baseline. It doesn't provide visibility, it doesn't detect threats, and it doesn't respond to attacks. So today we're going to explore why security operations, specifically a maritime-aware SOC capability, is becoming essential for ports, terminals, vessel operators, and maritime infrastructure organizations. One of the most dangerous assumptions is that compliance equals security. Compliance frameworks are valuable, make no mistake. They establish minimum expectations, they create consistency, and they provide accountability, which has been lacking. But compliance is fundamentally point in time. An auditor might verify that a control exists. That doesn't mean the control is functioning properly today. It doesn't mean someone is watching for malicious activity. And it certainly doesn't mean you'll detect an attack quickly. Threat actors don't care whether you pass an audit. They care whether they can move undetected. So that's the gap that we're going to focus on today. To be clear, compliance matters. The Coast Guard rule is pushing organizations to improve governance, formalize cybersecurity ownership, implement safeguards, and develop response capabilities. Those are all positive developments. But compliance activities are largely administrative and preventive in nature, with very little technical validation as part of the audit process. What they don't inherently provide is a good view of operational awareness. You can have policies, you can have MFA, you can have segmentation diagrams, and still have an attacker sitting in your environment for weeks, months, or even years. That's where monitoring detection become critical. Maritime environments are uniquely challenging from a cyber perspective. You're dealing with a giant blend of traditional IT systems and operational technology environments that were often never designed with cybersecurity in mind. Many OT systems are legacy systems. This is particularly true on board vessels. Some are vendor managed. Some cannot be easily patched or patched at all, and some cannot tolerate downtime. At the same time, organizations are increasingly connecting these systems for operational efficiency and for sometimes compliance purposes. That creates visibility challenges, it creates monitoring challenges, and it creates risks that traditional enterprise security tools often fail to address. One of the biggest problems in maritime cybersecurity isn't necessarily prevention, it's detection. Organizations lack visibility into OT communications, unauthorized access, vendor activity, cross-environmental movement between IT and OT. And because many maritime organizations don't centrally collect or correlate logs, suspicious activity can go unnoticed for long periods of time. In some cases, attackers can even cover their tracks by deleting logs if security operations aren't tight. Frequently, organizations don't discover incidents until operations are impacted, and that's far too late. This is an important distinction. Compliance functions and detection functions support each other, but they are fundamentally different disciplines. Compliance asks, do we have the required controls? Detection and observability asks, what is happening right now? You need both. A mature cybersecurity program cannot rely exclusively on documentation and annual assessments. You also need operational visibility in near real time and the ability to rapidly identify abnormal behavior. The maritime industry continues to face increasingly sophisticated threats. We've seen ransomware impact port operations. We've seen vendor access become an attack vector. We've seen attacks targeting operational continuity. And importantly, many of these attacks begin in the IT environment before moving toward those operational systems. That means organizations need the ability to correlate activity across both environments. Without centralized monitoring 24/7, these indicators often appear isolated and harmless. With a SOC capability, the patterns begin to emerge. You're able to footprint what normal looks like, and you're able to detect anomalies based upon the baselines that you establish. Not all SOCs are created equal. Traditional enterprise SOCs are typically designed around IT environments. They often lack OT protocol understanding, maritime operational context, asset criticality awareness. Understanding how maritime workflows is also absolutely critical. Knowing what normal should look like while a ship is underway or while a ship is offloading is important to be able to figure out what is normal, what is abnormal. As a result, folks often miss important indicators or overwhelm teams with false positives taken out of context. An effective maritime SOC has to understand both cybersecurity and maritime operations. What does an effective maritime SOC actually need to provide? First, continuous monitoring. Someone must be watching for indicators of compromise and abnormal activity. Second, OT awareness. The SOC must understand operational systems, protocols, and normal maritime operations. Third, centralized visibility. Logs and telemetry must be aggregated and correlated and reviewed regularly. A lot of folks I talk to say, yep, we review logs if there's an incident. Nope, you should be reviewing logs proactively to determine if you have an advanced persistent threat in your environment. And fourth, actionable response. Detection without response has limited value. The SOC has to be able to help organizations move from visibility to action. OT monitoring is very different from traditional IT monitoring. Many OT environments cannot tolerate aggressive scanning or intrusive tools. That means monitoring approaches must be passive and operationally safe. The SOC also needs visibility into device communications, behavioral abnormalities, unexpected configuration changes, unauthorized connections. Without IT-aware monitoring, organizations often operate with major blind spots in their most important systems. And again, cybersecurity isn't a technical thing, it's an operational thing. In maritime environments, incident response is not just a technical exercise. Cybersecurity teams must coordinate very closely with operations, executive leadership, legal, communications, third-party vendors. The SOC becomes a central coordination point during incidents. Organizations that already have established monitoring and escalation workflows typically respond much faster and are able to contain and eradicate and get operations back up better than those who don't. IR must also be exercised regularly with everyone understanding their roles within that, and the SOC becomes a central point of investigations and coordination. One important point, a SOC doesn't replace compliance, it strengthens it. SOC operations directly support many of the objectives the Coast Guard is ultimately concerned about: awareness, resilience, incident response, operational continuity. A mature cybersecurity operations capability demonstrates that cybersecurity is not just a paperwork exercise. It demonstrates operational effectiveness and readiness. One of the biggest decisions an organization faces is whether to build internally or outsource. Building internally provides control, but it's resource intensive, very resource intensive. Maintaining 24/7 monitoring capability is difficult. Finding personnel with cybersecurity and OT expertise is even harder. And retaining those folks is harder yet. That's why many maritime organizations move towards an outsourced or hybrid co-managed SOC model. The key is ensuring the provider understands maritime operations and OT environments, not just enterprise IT security. For many organizations, the question is not whether they need SOC capability. It's whether they already have visibility gaps they simply haven't identified yet. If your organization lacks centralized monitoring, if OT visibility is limited, or after-hour coverage doesn't exist, or if incident response is largely theoretical, those are strong indicators that additional operational security capability is needed. If you simplify everything we've covered today, the message is this: compliance is important, but compliance alone will not protect maritime operations. Organizations need visibility. They need monitoring, they need detection capability, and they need response processes that align with their operational realities and keep them up and running. That's where a maritime SOC becomes an essential part of your business. The organizations moving in this direction now are putting themselves in a much stronger position for both compliance and resilience. As we close today, I'd encourage you to think less about whether controls exist and more about whether you have visibility. Ask yourself, what activity could occur in our environment today without us knowing? Because ultimately, cybersecurity maturity is not measured only by policies and documentation. It's measured by operational awareness and the ability to respond effectively when something goes wrong. I appreciate everybody's time today, and now I'll open it up to questions. Okay, I have one question. How does MAD Security protect Maritime 365? Okay, so essentially, MAD Security has a 24/7 brick and mortar SOC. Everybody's eyes on glass, and everyone comes into the office to perform that function. What we found is that it is really hard to build a SOC. It took several of us many years to be able to effectively build a SOC that is able to have the personnel training program to bring folks in, advance them from tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 in order to do that. And in most cases, organizations simply don't have the resources to be able to do that, nor should they be. Normally, what I tell folks is that for the price of one person, usually we can provide significant amount of security operations center capability 24/7 to include all of your tools, and instead go to a co-managed model. If you want visibility and you want to maintain control, go to a co-managed model, which a good maritime SOC will do with you. They'll take care of the heavy lifting, triage, and send the important things up the chain as part of our playbook for those organizations to be able to actively participate in those. And those are kind of our strongest SOC relationships, is where the client understands security operations, leaves the heavy lifting, the log reviews, the threat intel, and those kinds of things to us, because we have multiple clients that we're doing that across. The other advantage is that if you have an organization that has a security operations center, they see the things that are happening in one organization, whereas a maritime SOC can see multiple organizations, and they can see that if something's happening over with this maritime organization, we should look into these other maritime organizations to see if we also find that issue or that vulnerability in their environment. So we're able to cross-correlate across the community effectively. So this question is about the Coast Guard and what they will say or do about security operations. As the Coast Guard figures out how to crawl, walk, run in this environment, and as they get up to speed, it was clear that training came first, and they wanted to put that stake in the ground and make sure that everybody had that fundamental understanding of the security operations, of how cybersecurity works, particularly in their unique environments. As we get into facility security assessments and those types of phases in 2027, having a security operations center speaks volumes for the maturity of your organization and how you're able to fight through. The Coast Guard cares about resilience, continuity of operations, and that's exactly what a SOC is designed to do. And I'm not sure how you would, quote unquote, do cybersecurity without a SOC function. If you have a bunch of things written, that's all well and good. If you have somebody that has a beeper or pager, you can tell how old I am by those terms. If you have somebody who's getting alerts, on their cell phone, and they're also an IT person, how effectively are they going to be able to respond? Well, what we found similar to CMMC is that if you have a maritime SOC, similar to CMMC, basically all of those audit and accountability functions are very mature. And I believe that the Coast Guard will recognize that. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Always feel free to reach out to me, cliff@madsecurity.com. Happy to field questions or have conversations about whatever you'd like. I appreciate everybody's time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.